Hi, I'm Mr. Dark Web, and today we're going to delve into the shadowy world of the Darknet, where the line between law and chaos is almost invisible. Here, in the darkness of the internet, every click can be fatal, and information is worth more than life. We will plunge into this world where rules exist only to be broken, and where justice has its own cruel laws. Leave your naivety at the door, because here, in the dark web, there is no room for weakness. This is a world where secrets are hidden behind multi-layered ciphers, and where every decision can be the last. I am your guide to this dark labyrinth, and today I will tell you a story that will make you think twice before stepping on this dangerous path. Today's story is going to be a bit out of the box. It's not about an experienced hacker or a criminal, but about an ordinary worker who, out of curiosity, looked into the darknet. His desire to find a good deal turned into a nightmare. This is the story of a man who had a simple life but lost everything because of one wrong step. Tighten your seatbelts, because this story will show you how one careless purchase can turn your life into a nightmare from which there is no escape. Are you ready? Then let's get started. My life up to that point had been completely ordinary. I worked at Walmart, a job like any other, not particularly interesting, but stable. You wake up at 6 a.m., go to work, put goods on the shelves, help customers, and come home. No high-profile positions, no career in IT or any other prestigious sector. Just a guy who did his job day in and day out to earn a living. It was the same set of tasks repeated every day. Morning shifts, evening shifts. Everything was so routine that it felt like I was on autopilot. My working day usually started early, even before sunrise. You wake up, have a quick breakfast, and go to the store, where boxes of goods are already waiting to be put on the shelves before the customers arrive. My shift usually ended in the afternoon, and I always felt exhausted after work. The store was always bustling, noisy, and it sucked all the energy out of me. But I knew that this was my job, and it gave me the means to live, even if it barely covered my basic needs. To be honest, I didn't have any hobbies or big plans for the future. After work, I usually returned home to find an empty apartment waiting for me. I lived alone, so I had no one at home to say hello or tell me about my day. It was a bit depressing, but I was used to it. I lived a quiet life, and sometimes, to escape from the routine, I read forums on the Darknet. I was always attracted to this hidden side of the internet where you could find anything you wanted, but I could not imagine how my curiosity would turn out. And then one evening, when I was tiredly flipping through pages on the Darknet after another hard day, I came across an ad that simply could not help but attract my attention. A top-of-the-line laptop. It was like a dream. The latest processor, tons of RAM, a powerful video card. Perfect. And the price, well, let's just say it was a 70% discount. Only $650 for something that would cost several times more in a store. The ad was simple, with no unnecessary details, but that's what aroused my interest. A top-of-the-line laptop with all the latest features, 70% off, for only $650. Just imagine. The latest processor, a bunch of RAM, a powerful video card, a high-resolution display. It was a very cool laptop that I could only dream of when I was working at Walmart for minimum wage. And then this price is just incredible. I even thought it might be a scam, but I decided to take a chance. In the description, the seller said that the laptop was brand new, but the box was open due to the peculiarities of transportation. You know, when you see such a text, you always have a little doubt. But at that moment I thought, damn it, this is too good an opportunity to miss. Perhaps it was just a person who urgently needed money and decided to sell his laptop quickly. These were the thoughts that were running through my head when I decided to write to the seller saying that I was going to buy it. The seller assured me that the laptop was brand new, but the box had been opened due to the peculiarities of transportation across the border. This laptop was supposedly meant for his wife, but she didn't appreciate it, and now he wanted to get rid of it. The seller looked reliable. His profile on Darknet had several positive reviews. Although there were 3 or 5 of them, I don't remember exactly, He assured me that everything would be fine and that he would send the laptop immediately after payment. I'm not used to trusting people, especially on the Darknet, but this was exactly what I was looking for, and I couldn't resist the temptation. Although I suspected that it could be a scam, and that after I sent the seller the cryptocurrency, he would simply disappear. But as it turned out, a much worse fate awaited me. It took me a few minutes to transfer the cryptocurrency to the specified address. I was a little nervous because it was a significant amount for me, but the discount seemed too attractive not to try. After confirming the transaction, I sent a message to the seller, informing him of the payment. He replied quite quickly, which pleasantly surprised me. He informed me that the parcel would be shipped via FedEx, and after a while he provided a tracking number. For the next few days, I kept checking the status of the shipment. Everything was going smoothly, without any delays or problems. I even thought that maybe I was just lucky to come across a good deal. 3 days later, the package was already in the city where I lived. When the FedEx courier finally rang the doorbell, I eagerly signed for it and took the box. It looked quite ordinary, nothing suspicious. I couldn't even imagine that there could be anything wrong inside. Excitedly, I opened the parcel thinking, at least it's not a stone. But no, in this regard, everything turned out to be even better than I expected. The laptop was exactly as described. Everything looked new, as if it had just left the factory. The packaging was a little damaged, but the laptop itself was in perfect condition. It was like a real gift of fate. I even tested it by turning it on and making sure everything worked. For the first time in a long time, I felt really happy, proud of myself, because I managed to save a lot of money on such a purchase. But as they say, free cheese is only in a mousetrap. A few weeks later, my joy turned into a nightmare. One morning, there was a loud knock at the door. It was the police. But not only the police, it was special forces with weapons and all sorts of things to break down the door of my apartment. They broke into my house, threw me to the floor, broke my arms, and handcuffed me. They showed me a search warrant. They quickly began to inspect my apartment. They seized my laptop and took me in for interrogation. I was in shock and did not understand what was happening. Interrogation is something I will never forget. Have you ever felt like the ground was slipping away from under your feet, and you just didn't know how to get out of this abyss? That's exactly how I felt when I was brought to the police station. Police, special forces, armed men in masks. It all seemed like a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. I was shoved into a small room without windows. The walls were bare, only a table and 2 chairs. It felt like I was locked in a cage. The door behind me closed, and I heard the key turn in the lock. I was left alone in this room, and I could feel the cold sweat running down my back. Time seemed to have stopped. Maybe 10 minutes had passed, but it seemed like an eternity. Finally, the door opened and 2 detectives entered the room. They took their time, looking at me as if I were prey caught in a trap. One of them was tall, with a stern face. The other was shorter and slightly overweight. Both looked at me as if I were guilty of something very serious. They sat down across from me, exchanged glances, and began interrogating me. "Do you know why you're here?" the taller one asked, looking at me gloomily. His voice was cold, without emotion. I tried to explain that I just bought a laptop on the Darknet, but he didn't even let me finish. "We know what you were doing. Stop lying. Do you think we don't know who you are and what you do?" He raised his voice, as if trying to break me morally. I felt everything inside me shrink with fear. I tried to keep my composure and explain the situation to them. But the more I talked, the more they were convinced that I was guilty. The second detective, the shorter one, smiled and leaned forward, bringing his face closer to mine. "You mean to tell me you just bought this laptop and didn't know anything about what was being done on it?" His voice was mocking, as if he didn't believe a word I said. I tried to keep my cool and not give in to their provocations. "Yes, I bought it, 3 times cheaper than the market value. I had no idea that it was used for any illegal activities," I said. But they didn't listen. They started giving me details that scared me. They knew more than I could have imagined. They knew that this laptop had been used for large-scale cybercrime. It had been used to steal large sums of money from bank accounts, commit credit card fraud, and hack into corporate systems. The numbers were frightening. Millions of dollars, hundreds of victims. "And you're telling me you had nothing to do with it?" the tall detective asked coldly, looking at me from under his forehead. My attempts to explain that I simply could not have known about it looked pathetic against their accusations. They pressured me from all sides, forcing me to confess to something I hadn't done. From time to time, they changed tactics. One threatened me, the other played nice, trying to get me to take their side, but all their words were aimed at making me break. When I repeated that I was innocent, they began to act more harshly. The tall one stood up and suddenly hit the table with his fist, making me flinch. He started shouting that I was already up to my ears in this shit, and I'd better tell them everything now, otherwise they would make my life even worse. "Do you think we are here for nothing? We'll put you in jail if you don't start talking." His voice was so loud that it could be heard echoing in the small room. I could feel my body trembling with nerves and fear. I didn't know what else to say. How could I prove that I was just a victim of deception? In any case, all my words were smashed against a wall of distrust. They saw me as a criminal, and nothing seemed to convince them otherwise. The interrogation lasted for several hours. It seemed to me that I was losing my sense of reality. They did not let me rest. They asked the same question over and over again, trying to throw me off balance. They used different methods: pressure, manipulation, ridicule. Sometimes they even left me alone in the room for a long time, making me doubt myself. When they finally let me out of the room, I felt broken and exhausted. It seemed like days had passed, but in reality, it was only a few hours. I knew I was already guilty for them, no matter what I said or did. You can't even imagine how I felt when I started to find out what they were doing with the laptop I bought. It was something on the verge of reality and horror, as if I had woken up in a nightmare from which I could not get out. At first, I didn't even realize how serious the charges were, but the more I learned, the deeper the fear gripped me. Of course, the police did not immediately reveal all the cards. They hinted, threatened, and made me nervous until I broke down and started asking them to explain what exactly was going on. They looked at me as if I were guilty, and every look they gave me pierced me to the bone. Finally, after hours of interrogation, they began to reveal details, and what I heard made me feel like the ground was caving in under my feet. Several serious cybercrimes were committed from that laptop. One of the biggest was the hacking of banking systems. Imagine this. A huge amount of money, millions of dollars, was stolen from the accounts of people and companies. Using sophisticated phishing attacks and exploits, criminals accessed bank accounts and transferred money to anonymous cryptocurrency wallets. The police claimed that this laptop was the main tool used to carry out these attacks. They found evidence linking specific transactions to this device. But that's not all. The person who used this laptop before me was also involved in other types of fraud. They were logging into people's personal accounts on various services and withdrawing funds from credit cards. It wasn't just some petty theft. It was a systematic crime involving hundreds of victims around the world. They used the stolen data to apply for loans for fictitious persons, and then disappeared, leaving their victims with debts they did not even know they had. In addition, the laptop was used to launch DDoS attacks on large corporations. With the help of these attacks, they forced the company's websites to fail, paralyzing their work for a long time. This led to huge financial losses for the companies and affected their reputation. The police said that they found traces of these attacks that led to the IP address that was recorded on my laptop. And perhaps worst of all, this laptop was used to attack people's personal information. Identity theft, email hacking, social media hacking. All of this was done through this device. The victims did not even realize that their personal information was already sold on the Darknet or used for even more dangerous crimes. The police told me that this laptop was a real weapon in the hands of criminals. It was configured to leave as few traces as possible, and all operations were encrypted and well disguised. They showed me the log files and the action log where all these attacks were recorded. I looked at this data and couldn't believe that this was all happening from a device that now belongs to me. I was accused of being part of this organized criminal group. They were convinced that I was the one behind all these attacks, and that I was just using the legend of buying a laptop to hide my actions. My words that I had just bought a laptop did not matter against the background of all the evidence they had collected. Have you ever felt like your life is falling apart in a few minutes? That's exactly what it was like. I was sitting in that room, listening to their accusations, and I couldn't understand how it was that I was in this nightmare. They had already passed their verdict, and I was just another criminal to be punished. The police have their own logic. Even if you bought something suspicious, you are already guilty until you prove otherwise. But it's almost impossible to prove your innocence when you've made a purchase on the Darknet. There are no papers, traces, or guarantees. In addition, the seller deleted all correspondence, leaving no trace. The only thing I had left was a crypto transaction worth the equivalent of $650. However, this information only led the investigation to a dead end, without relieving me of my suspicions. The accusation was very serious. I was charged with fraud on an especially large scale, which provided for a prison sentence of up to 15 years. My psychological state began to deteriorate rapidly. I could not believe that my life could be ruined because of this purchase. At some point, I was ready to confess to things I hadn't done to end this nightmare. The moment I first stepped into the courtroom was one of those that will always remain in my memory. The atmosphere was tense. The walls seemed to be pressing on me from all sides. I knew it would be a battle, but I had no idea how unfair it would be. Everything looked as if this trial was just a formality, and the verdict had long been passed behind closed doors. My lawyer was appointed by the state. This is the type of lawyer you get when you don't have money for a private defense lawyer. And although I realized that he was not here of his own free will, I still hoped that he would do his best to defend me. But from the very beginning, it was clear that he had no intention of helping me. His eyes never met mine. He quickly flipped through the documents and then seemed more interested in what was happening outside the window than in my case. When it came to the trial, the prosecutor took the case seriously. He was determined to make an example out of me, to show how the state effectively fights cybercriminals. He had in his hands all the evidence collected during the investigation, log files that confirmed the attacks, cryptocurrency transactions that he interpreted as part of my money laundering plan, and, of course, the laptop itself, which had all the traces of the crimes. From the very first minute of the court hearing, the prosecutor began to put pressure on me. He got up from his seat, and with a smile that looked more predatory than friendly, he began to ask questions. Every word he said was like a whip. Every question was insidiously designed to trap me. He twisted my answers, manipulated the facts, and all the time tried to prove that I was in collusion with that criminal group. When I tried to explain that I had just bought this laptop and had no idea about its past, the prosecutor just smiled sarcastically. He turned my words against me, making me look even more guilty. You mean to say that you didn't know what you were buying on the Darknet? That you didn't check the origin of the laptop? That just like an innocent lamb, you decided to buy a device on a network where crime is rampant? His voice was filled with mockery. My lawyer was sitting next to me, but he looked like he was 1,000 miles away. He hardly intervened, did not try to question the prosecutor's words or defend me from his attacks. All he did was nod a few times, as if agreeing with everything the prosecutor was saying. I realized that something was wrong, but I could not change the course of events. I had a feeling that he and the prosecutor were working in collusion, that they were just trying to reduce the time needed for this process without worrying about justice. Every day of the trial was like torture. The prosecutor called some witnesses, cybersecurity experts, who confirmed that the crimes were committed from the same laptop that belonged to me. They used technical jargon that I didn't understand, but which the judge listened to with all seriousness. The prosecutor talked about sophisticated money laundering schemes, the use of anonymous networks and proxy servers to hide traces. He painted a picture in which I was not just a random buyer, but an experienced cybercriminal who had consciously chosen this path. My lawyer remained a silent observer. He hardly asked any questions, did not try to challenge the evidence or offer alternative versions of events. His only contribution to the defense was to read a prepared speech, where he asked the judge to take into account my impeccable past and the fact that I had always worked honestly. During the cross-examination, the prosecutor came closer to me. His eyes were looking right into my soul, and I felt like he was ready to tear me apart. "You say you didn't know that this laptop was used for crimes? But how can you explain the fact that you were the one who entered your data to buy on the Darknet, where everyone knows it's a marketplace for criminals?" His words were heavy. They pressured me, making me feel small and defenseless. I tried to explain that I had no intention of committing a crime, that I just wanted to save money, but every word I said only strengthened his confidence in my guilt. The prosecutor continued to press, and I felt my strength leaving me. My lawyer was silent, and I realized that he was not going to fight for me. The judge seemed to have already made his decision. He showed no emotion, just listened coldly as the prosecutor continued to destroy my reputation. All this evidence, all this testimony that was supposed to prove my guilt, was just part of a big game where I was the victim. When the trial was over, I felt completely exhausted. I was humiliated, made to feel guilty for something I didn't do. I realized that this trial was not about justice. It was a play where my life was just one of the scenes. The lawyer who was supposed to defend me betrayed me, leaving me alone with the prosecutor who was ready to do anything to convict me. Still, the judges listened to the defense's arguments, because my past was impeccable. No police reports, no fines. I was just an ordinary worker from Walmart. But even that didn't help, because the evidence against me was extremely strong, so the court hearing was postponed that time. With such a state lawyer and such an intrusive prosecutor who decided to make an example of me for cybercriminals, it was absolutely clear that I needed a top-paid lawyer to defend me. But his services cost a lot of money, much more than I could afford. I had to spend all my savings, which were not much anyway. But even that was not enough. To pay for the lawyers I needed much more money than I had. The trial seemed doomed, and I almost lost hope. Then my parents made a decision that surprised me to the core. They decided to sell our family home to hire a top lawyer. The house was sold well below market value because there was no time to bid. It was a difficult decision that hurt our family, but there was no other way out. When I first met the new lawyer, he made a deep impression on me. His name was Alex Rain, and he was known in legal circles as a real bulldog in the courtroom. He was not only a professional in his field, but also a person who could listen carefully and really understood the situation I was in. From the very first day, he began to study all the details of my case, not missing a single detail. Alex emphasized that the first thing to do was to find the weaknesses in the prosecutor's arguments. He started by carefully reviewing all the evidence that had been presented during the previous trial, and what he found made me feel a relief I hadn't felt in a long time. First, he found that the log files on which most of the charges were based had been misinterpreted. The prosecutor used information from the logs to prove that cybercrime had been committed from my laptop, but Alex pointed out that the logs were not sufficiently authenticated. In fact, they could have been forged or manipulated, and this opened a huge gap in the prosecution's evidence base. Secondly, he pointed out the lack of a direct link between me and the crimes committed. "You have no evidence that it was me who committed these actions," was the key argument of our defense. Alex was able to prove that the mere fact of buying a laptop does not automatically make me guilty of all the crimes that were related to it. But the real breakthrough came when Alex discovered an important piece of evidence that the prosecutor had somehow overlooked. It turned out that a few months before I bought this laptop, it had been stolen from the office of a large company. Not just stolen, but stolen through a fraudulent scheme. This meant that the laptop had its own history that they tried to hide in order to frame me. At the trial, Alex proved to be a real master. He started by questioning all of the prosecutor's main evidence. His questions were clear and sharp, and he gave the witnesses and the prosecutor no opportunity to evade the question. When he addressed the judge, his speech was measured but full of determination. Most importantly, he was able to draw the judge's attention to the fact that I was a victim of circumstances. He proved that I had bought the laptop on a legal Darknet site at the time, without knowing about its past. Alex drew attention to the fact that even if this laptop was used for crimes, it did not make me guilty of these crimes. Alex also destroyed the image that the prosecutor was trying to create around me. Instead of being cold and aloof, he made me a person with a story. He talked about how I worked at Walmart, how I tried to live an honest life and make ends meet. He showed the judge and the jury that I was not a criminal, but a person who got into a difficult situation because of my naivety. In his closing argument, Alex made a strong case. My client was set up. He was used as a pawn in a game he doesn't even understand. He's not a hacker. He's not a criminal. He's just a person who wanted to buy a cheap laptop. And now he is paying too high a price for it. His words stirred emotions in everyone in the room, and I could see the judge listening intently to every word. After that, the judge announced a break for a meeting with the jury. I don't remember how much time passed, but it seemed like an eternity. I sat there, thinking that my fate was now in the hands of those few people who could either free me or keep me a prisoner of the circumstances I was in. When the jury returned and the judge announced a not guilty verdict, it felt like a lightning strike. I couldn't believe my ears. Alex had done the impossible. He saved me from years of imprisonment, a ruined life and reputation. It was not just a release, it was a real triumph of justice. After I was acquitted, the investigators summoned me back for questioning. They demanded to know more about the parcel that started it all. I explained that I had ordered the laptop through the Darknet, transferred the cryptocurrency, and then received it via FedEx. They recorded my testimony, but I could see that their distrust of me still remained, despite the acquittal. After the trial, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But at the same time, I realized that this experience had changed me forever. I would never again be that naive guy who was ready to believe anything that seemed too good to be true. Alex taught me how to fight, and I was grateful for that. It wasn't just a victorious moment. It was a liberation from the horror I had fallen into because of my naivety. But the price I had to pay for this victory was too high, so the joy did not last long. I felt devastated and broken. My reputation in the store was destroyed. My colleagues began to look at me with suspicion, and the management hinted that I shouldn't come to work anymore. My parents had to sacrifice their home for my freedom, and our relationship with them deteriorated after this situation, and I found myself in a deep depression that lasted for a year. Immediately after the trial, I returned home, but there was no home anymore. Our family home where I grew up was sold. It was sold for a pittance to save me, and this decision my parents made left a deep scar on our relationship. I felt that because of my naivety and negligence, they lost everything they had built over the years. And although I am grateful to them for what they did, it didn't change the fact that they lost a part of their lives because of me. When I first saw them after the trial, I noticed the sadness in their eyes. They were no longer the carefree people who had always supported me. There was fatigue and disappointment in their eyes. My mother tried to hide it, but my father was direct and did not hold back his emotions. He did not shout or accuse me to my face, but his silence spoke more than any words. One evening, as we sat around the table in the small apartment they were able to rent after selling the house, my father finally broke down. "Do you realize that we lost everything because of you?" He said, his voice calm, but full of deep resentment. "Your naivety cost us our home. We owned this house for over 30 years and now we have nothing. And all because you decided to take a chance and buy something on that damn Darknet." I tried to explain that I could not have foreseen that things would turn out so badly, that I only wanted to save money. But these arguments seemed pathetic even to me. I realized that no words could bring back their lost home, the peace and stability they had before. My mom was a little more sympathetic, but I could see how this situation broke her. She tried to support me, saying that everything will be fine, but I knew her heart was broken. She lost the house where all our memories were, the place where she raised me. The guilt that I caused them to lose everything became unbearable. After that incident, our relationship began to gradually deteriorate. My father became even more distant, and we hardly ever talked. His silence was the most painful punishment for me. He started avoiding me, didn't show up at home when I was there. his disappointment in me became obvious, and it was not only because of the loss of the house, but also because of my negligence that led to this situation. My mother continued to try to keep the remnants of the family relationship alive, but I could see that she was starting to withdraw. She stopped talking to me as she used to, and spent more time alone, in her thoughts. Every conversation we had was filled with tension, and I knew it was because of me. Every day when I saw them broken, I felt the burden of guilt pressing down on me more and more. Eventually, I decided to move out of that apartment. I knew that my presence was only making the situation worse. I could no longer look at their suffering and know that I was the cause of it. Now I am living alone again, and although I was acquitted in court, I feel guilty towards my parents. We rarely communicate. Our relationship has remained broken. I often wonder if I will ever be able to fix what I have destroyed, but I see no way to do so. Now I know that some decisions have consequences that cannot be undone. Sometimes even a victory in court does not mean a victory in life. So if you see a super discount on something you've been dreaming of for a long time, think twice, or better yet, 3 times. It may turn out to be not just a laptop or smartphone, but a trap that will drag you into a whirlpool of problems you could not even think of. This story is a vivid warning of how one thoughtless decision can change your life forever. Although the protagonist was acquitted in court, his victory proved to be illusory. He lost much more than he gained. His reputation was destroyed, his relationship with his parents was severely damaged, and a sense of guilt and emptiness haunted him. In pursuit of profit, he lost control of his life, and even the acquittal in court did not restore his former peace. The moral of this story is simple and important. Be careful and vigilant, especially when it comes to attractive offers on the internet, particularly in its shady corners. What seems too good to be true often turns out to be a trap, the consequences of which can be devastating. Sometimes the price you pay for naivety and gullibility is too high. To avoid such situations, always thoroughly check sources and information. Do not succumb to the temptation of quick and easy gains. And remember that it's safer to pay more for a legal purchase than to risk everything for the sake of an illusory savings. If you liked this story or found an important lesson in it, don't forget to like and share your thoughts in the comments. Also, have you ever experienced a situation where an innocent decision led to unexpected consequences? Let's discuss this together. Thank you for watching this video to the end. I hope the story made you think about the importance of caution in today's world. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories that will help you better navigate difficult situations. See you in the next videos.